Hello and welcome to this reading of a DMT trip report titled The Mother Spirit Awaits by user Universal Shaman. The user reported taking 75 milligrams of smoked DMT, and the report was listed as a glowing experience. It's been a few weeks now since my first encounter with DMT, something long awaited and highly anticipated, but which completely transcended any expectations I'd had of it. I'd read a lot of McKenna's rants about self-transforming machine elves and Amazon shamans helping spirits and ancestors, and friends had told me about gnomes in giant stack hats running around in a fully psychedelic playground. No matter how much I'd heard about the alien intelligence encounters, I kept putting them aside as interpretations that color and play off each other. Like one person says they encountered aliens, so the next person interprets their own trip in a similar way, which creates a chain of influence over every next tripper. However, I did expect something alien, something that I could recognize as alien, something sci-fi or fantastical, like a psychedelic Star Trek. I couldn't have been further from the fact of the matter. I was at a friend's house organizing some other drug-related circumstances. It came up that he had a bit of DMT left and he asked me if I was interested in trying some. Absolutely not. So we got in the car and drove to the place he recommended tripping at. Up in the hills in a national park, a 5-minute walk through scrub into a secluded forest area. During the walk, we talked about the feeling of the place, noting there was a distinct pagan ritual site feeling about the area. A kind of overarching, all-seeing, watchful presence about the environment, but it was peaceful, clear-skied, and fairly shaded and cool. In retrospect, I'm sure this comfortable place influenced the quality of the DMT flash. I had 2 attempts about 15 minutes apart because the first was not noticeably a peak experience, but it was a good introduction to the totally alien nature of the DMT vision. Taking in the first toke around 25 milligrams, I began to notice weird body sensations. My trunk became slightly elongated and everything was surging with an energy that was totally silent to the ears, but like a raging river in my mind. My heart felt like it was about to burst through my ribcage as I reached the peak of the inhalation. I let out a single laugh as I began to exhale, partly because the sensations were awesome, not unlike the body rushes of mushrooms, but I was mostly just ecstatic that DMT molecules were finally having their way with my mind. I closed my eyes and was immediately face to face with a supreme being of sorts. It had no face and its form was a string of multicolored lights constantly morphing, like a clown making a series of balloon animals. Beginning with a dog, he alters a couple of the parts, holds it differently to reveal a dolphin, and so on. It was certainly a living presence, and without a face, it was still somehow staring eye to eye with me, as though it knew everything about my entire life. There was no sense of emotional attachment, but there was a definite supra-linguistic communication happening. This being and I were traveling at great speeds through an infinite stretch of deep space. I was chasing it. It stayed the same distance away from me the whole time and seemed to be at ease with the speed, while I was struggling to keep up. It was as though it wanted me there, but not yet. Not in this way. It was telling me to come back when I could keep up with it, when I could catch up and pass straight through it. Maybe this was the membrane that separates the being's world with mine, the chrysanthemum that McKenna described. The being zoomed away and the effects started to fade, leaving me in a blissful kind of luminescent state that surpassed any notion of Zen or meditative bliss. The real world had become indescribably fresh and crystal clear while I had my eyes closed. 15 minutes later, and the second attempt was around twice the dose of the first, and began just the same. The visual environment became kind of fuzzy and my body seemed to spaghettify just slightly. But within seconds of this, there was a distinct difference. I had only heard this described in other people's accounts once, I think, and I had totally forgotten about the possibility of it happening until it actually happened to me. Just after I released the toke, I looked around to see what was happening to my senses as I was coming up. When the entire universe began to buzz, it was like a deep bass feedback loop that you sometimes hear in electronic music. Like the humming noises of flying saucers in movies, very electronic and computer-like, but unbelievably real and right there, all around me. I immediately thought that the DMT had unlocked a whole new realm of sound that we could not normally hear. A background kind of sound that would distract our ears from normal functioning. The sound that matter makes. I've perceived the vibrations of matter and subatomic particles on other trips. On mushrooms, acid, and now with DMT, it was a totally audible reality. And more than just audible, this sharp bassy hum that was coming out of everything made everything vibrate, including myself and my sitter next to me. It was so intense and pervasive that I had to close my eyes and escape the motion sickness of this vibrating mass of existence. When I did, the buzz began to mutate and break up into all these telephonic, electronic, modem-like noises, like a kaleidoscope of sound. The sounds built and built, reaching a peak that culminated in a vortex which sucked everything in existence, the buzzing, the environment around me, and my entire being into a totally foreign dimension, and there I was with total silence. The buzzing was gone, and I was in a room looking at a wall. The wall was like a complex scaffold of constantly morphing angular prisms, shimmering with colors that are completely beyond the descriptions of any language, and totally awe-inspiring. I felt an uncontrollable smile grow across my face. Reality check, but I kept watching. I immediately noticed that there was something more than just the wall. I noticed at first there was something in the wall popping out occasionally to show me it was there. It wanted me to recognize it before it would fully come through. It was something like watching the flat surface of a calm beach and seeing a dolphin periodically break the surface for air. When I recognized there was definitely something living, swimming through this scaffold of unbelievable shapes and colors. And then it came out. It was a non-human female being flying around this hyperdimensional room. She wore a flowing cape or gown that streamed directly off a big round glowing face, the kind of face that a 3-year-old kid draws. A circle with dots for eyes and a curved line for a mouth. That's all there was of her, but her face was so alive, compassionate, and enlightened. She was so happy that I realized she was there. Then I watched as the pedestal literally grew out of the floor of this room, made of the same unearthly, super brilliant scaffolding. My attention must have been distracted by this thing growing out of the ground, because the female got in my face and communicated to me, not in words, "Look at what's on the pedestal." I looked up and saw a diamond-shaped object that was made of similar stuff to the walls, but infinitely more brilliant, more dazzling, more unspeakably awesome. And as my smile grew and total awe and amazement filled me, this female began flying around the object at great speed, keeping her eyes fixed on me. She was doing flips and sharp turns and cheering as though she celebrated the fact that she had the chance to show me. She kept communicating to me, "Look at it, isn't it awesome?" This continued, and I kept my eyes on that unbelievable object as the scene began to fade. I became aware of my hands folded in my lap, slightly sweaty. My body was on a high and full of energy as my mind began to return to the reality of sitting in a forest setting, next to the person who had just initiated me into yet another, but easily the most awesome dimension of consciousness with a profound sense of fulfillment and far greater purpose and perspective in my life's quest to understand the nature of this human existence. From these experiences, I have to say DMT is quite patently the most accessible of the deep psychedelic states, and in terms of the practical empirical analysis of one's own shamanic journeys, this is by far the easiest landscape to traverse that I've encountered. Mushrooms require a huge amount of dedication and spiritual preparation, weeks and months for the most rewarding outcomes, massive amounts of attention, and a great deal of energy to keep myself at least partly detached from the emotional roller coasters that the mushroom state can draw me into, particularly because of the extended time of the trips. Same goes for the powerful acid trips and other indole hallucinogens. I say this not because DMT is so short-acting, but because on a proper dose of DMT, one's being is thrust into a peak experience. There is no choice in the matter. On mushrooms or acid, one must guide his or her own thoughts and emotions through precarious, unknown landscapes. And even then, a peak experience is not guaranteed. DMT, however, seems to serve a peak experience on a platter with a salad on the side. I knew from the moment I started toking to when I found myself in another dimensional room, I knew this was right. The DMT wanted me there and took me there. All I had to do was receive it graciously. So here's my interpretation of the trip report this user has written. I think even though he was pleased with this experience, it seems the message from this alien entity that he met was that he isn't ready to receive any major spiritual revelations right now. The part where he was describing himself chasing this entity, which seemed to be at ease with the speed it was moving, and he was struggling to keep up, tell me that he wasn't ready to receive any of the major spiritual messages that he was hoping for. In the part where he describes the entity having no sense of emotional attachment, and that its face was crude and drawn like a child's drawing, might allude to it suggesting that he think about his emotional life and maybe his relationships. The fact that the entity was a woman, was female, and that it presented a pedestal with a diamond-shaped object on it might suggest that relationships and people in his life might be the things that he should be concerned with. But also, judging by the poster and his interests, the part about the dolphins breaking for air maybe suggests that he's an intelligent person or a spiritual person, but maybe that he should return to the surface and come back to real life a little bit, not trying to be deep all the time, And the scaffolding, the kind of living, amazing scaffolding, maybe is pointing towards working on some structural development of his ideas and beliefs. A lot of the times with these kinds of things, we want to wander off into the fantastical and the otherworldly for what these messages and experiences might be. But I think a lot of the time, these are very human challenges that these experiences present. These are very human messages that come across about worldly things that really are consequential in your real life experience. Also, maybe just as an aside, the title, coincidentally, The Mother Spirit Awaits, might point to archetypical psychology and maybe some books by Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell or that general area of psychology. He described the entity as being sort of taunting and clown-like. There's a book called The Four Archetypes, which two of the archetypes are the mother and the jester or the clown. That might be a good book to maybe look into on the subject. He also mentions salad a few times, which I thought was a bit out of place. Maybe he can pursue these things in a healthy way, as well as his experimenting with psychedelic drugs. Maybe the real growing and learning is mostly in the real world somewhere. But this is just my opinion. If you'd like to give your own interpretation or share your own experiences, please feel free to below. I hope you enjoyed the reading, and there'll be more coming soon.